Hello everybody and welcome. This is the Midnight McBride Show, show number 69. And I've got a very special lady in the studio with me, and the show is called Terminal Velocity. And the reason for that is my special guest, Samantha Wilson, was diagnosed with a terminal illness many years ago, and she's still here. And Samantha's now becoming an author, and she's also the founder of a training academy, which we'll get to as well. Yeah. Hello, Samantha.
Thank you very much for inviting me on the show, Patrick.
You're very welcome. And we'll start off with how we know each other.
Yes.
And a little funny story as well, which I told you at the start of the show. Yeah.
That was very funny.
So you're a mutual friend through Donna Webb.
I am, yes. We're good friends. She's a lovely lady.
Yeah.
And she was the lady that kindly got me in contact with yourself and
Yes.
to come on the show.
And the funny story is, Donna, by the way, I think very highly of Donna. I think she's a beautiful woman. She's been a volunteer in numerous charities and support groups for the last 30 years, giving up her time. It's all voluntary, you know,
Yeah.
and she's just an amazing human being. So I'm very, very privileged to know Donna. I think she's amazing.
She's a lovely lady. And we met, funnily enough, it was about 3 years ago. We were on a course together and I was a bit nervous, and she, made me feel at ease.
Yeah.
And ever since then, we've just become such good friends. And she knew that I was writing a book, and she knew I was quite anxious about it, and she's been so supportive and put me at ease. And she's such an inspiring lady because she's always there to help everyone else.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I was very lucky to have met her that day 3 years ago, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, the funny story is that Donna said that she had a friend,
Yes.
a Samantha Wilson, to come on the show, and that she's recently becoming an author, and she was a very inspiring, amazing lady. I thought, yay. So I then searched on Facebook for Samantha Wilson.
Yeah.
And I found Samantha Wilson that had some connections with people that I knew, and she was an author. And I thought, okay. 2 months in, I'd befriended her, tried to get her on the show, realised she lived in Portugal, I think it is, and she'd written a book about the Camino Santiago, the Camino Trail.
Fascinating.
And it was the wrong Samantha Wilson. And after a while, I think Donna said to me, have you been in touch with Samantha? And I went, yeah, we're friends now. And she said, I don't think you have. I went, no, I definitely have. And completely the wrong lady. Who knew there'd be two of you?
I know.
Because we had mutual connections as well with this other Samantha Wilson. So,
Wow.
how bizarre.
How bizarre is that?
Yeah.
Well, finally, there was contact, because Donna mentioned that you were going to be contacting me.
Yeah.
And she said, has Patrick contacted you yet? And I'm like, no. Like about a month and a half down the line, has Patrick contacted you yet?
I think she must have just thought I was a bullshitter, because I've been going, yeah. So anyway, I'm friends with some other lady now as well, but there we go. Your story, we're going to talk about Samantha.
Yes.
Very inspirational and quite unusual as well.
Yeah.
And there's lots of it that I want to, parts of this story that I think it's important we make sure we include in this this journey. But predominantly, and we'll touch on it briefly before we get into it, but it's, you were diagnosed with a terminal illness many years ago, and you're here.
Yes.
And you weren't given long to live either.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It wasn't. Yes.
Yeah. And that's why the show, I mean, I like to have a little bit of a catchy title, and so I went with Terminal Velocity, which I don't think there's anything wrong with having a little bit of fun in all situations as
No,
well.
of
I
course.
think it's healthy.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So, Samantha, let's start your journey. Crumpsall.
Yes. Well, I was born in Crumpsall Hospital, and that's when my life begun in 1970, the 9th of July I was born.
I'm the 7th of July.
Wow.
Yeah.
How fabulous is that?
Yeah, so
Two
you're
Cancerians.
Yes.
My parents already had a son, my brother, Paul, who's 18 months younger than me.
Yeah.
So we lived in Middleton for about 3 months. Mum and dad, because there was quite a close age, they were quite busy as mums and dads, really, with 2 young children.
Yeah. Yeah. One of them being you.
One of them being, of course, me, yes.
Yeah.
And then from there, from Middleton, my parents got a house in Haywood, and they started their family life in Haywood with me and Paul. So that's how our family life began, really.
Yeah. You started off, and in your childhood, you actually started to become ill at quite a young age, didn't you?
Yes. Well, first of all, from a very early age, I had certain health problems where I had quite a few convulsions. So I was in and out of hospital from the age of 4 with that. But it was actually when I was aged 8, probably for about 5 months beforehand, I was bruising quite easily. And one particular time I was, as you are as a child, I was 8, I was boisterous, wanted to play out with my friends. And I was on a bike at the top of the hill near where I lived. And I was going down the hill and I fell off it. My own fault, of course, because I was going too fast.
Yeah.
And as I fell off, I cut my knee open, and as a child, I was upset. Went straight home, and my mum, put a cold compress on, and then put a plaster on. I was fine, and there was nothing more thought of it. And then after about 15 minutes, I was back outside causing havoc with my friends. So, things at the time were fine. And that actual cut on the knee graze, instead of it healing, it turned like a black, mesh, really. And it wasn't healing.
Right.
Which my parents thought, well, that was a bit strange. And I was really, really pale in colour. And, there's a few bruises. And they were thinking, right, okay. It was a mess, really. And my parents were a bit concerned about that.
Yeah.
And, but, I was still quite boisterous in myself. About 2 weeks after this wound wasn't healing, I started to feel terrible. I remember I was sweating a lot. I was being sick, and I just felt atrocious. And by that time, my parents,
They knew something was wrong at this point. Then.
I tried making an appointment with the local doctor at the time that we were under, and it was snowy. Them in the 70s when it was so snowy. So the doctor said she couldn't get out. So she said, "Can you bring Samantha up here?" So my dad carried me on his back, and like a piggyback, and partway up he fell with me because it was so thick. So he picked me up again, and he carried me and got to the doctors and went into her treatment room. And the doctor took one look at me and basically said, "You need to get Samantha home straight away. I'm going to ring a specialist from the hospital," which, that in itself, alarm bells for my parents. And within about 3 hours, there was someone come to visit me. And this doctor came and basically said that, we need Samantha to go to hospital straight away. So I was taken to Booth Hall Children's Hospital, where blood tests were taken. And they thought at the time I had glandular fever. So I was put in isolation.
Yeah.
And the bloods came back quite quickly. And my parents were brought into a room. The doctor that was under at Booth Hall that day said to my parents, "Oh, we've got some really bad news. We've done Samantha's blood test, and we've identified a problem with the cells. We do believe it's leukemia."
So this is leukemia's cancer of the blood,
That's
isn't it?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. And I was kept in the hospital overnight. My parents were devastated. My mum stayed. And the following day, I was transferred by ambulance with my parents up to Pendlebury Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
And there, it didn't take long for me to be admitted to Burkhardt ward, which is a cancer ward for children.
Am I right in saying, when it comes to cancer,
Yeah.
generally, if you've got cancer localised in one part of your body
Yeah.
and it's in an organ, as terrible as that might be, quite often it can be operable.
Yes.
When it's in your blood, leukemia, this is the most difficult type of cancer to treat.
Of course, that's correct.
It's throughout your body, isn't it?
You know, it's like you said, it's not just in a localised area. It's actually, you know, your cells developed in your bone marrow, and these cells, they were obviously rogue cells going out into the body, and unfortunately, you know, it was happening to me. My parents were brought into this particular cancer ward. At the time, I remember thinking, God, these people are, you know, children, they look so poorly. Little did I know, you know, I would be facing the same battle and looking the same way. So the specialist at the time wanted for me to have a lumbar puncture and a bone marrow, just to obviously see.
Tell us what a lumbar puncture is.
A lumbar puncture basically is where a large needle is actually put into the lower part of your back from the bone marrow. From the bone, it's actually the needle's put in there and extracting fluid from it to see obviously what cells, whether there is any problems with the cells of the blood. So that was done first. The results came back really quickly, and my parents were brought in to see the specialist, who said, unfortunately, Samantha has a very rare form of leukemia, myelocytic myeloid leukemia, and it's a chronic form of leukemia. Samantha's chances of survival are 0. What we can do is try and prolong Samantha's life as much as we possibly can. So a form of chemotherapy was advised, but they did say it's a form of chemotherapy that we give to adults. And, you know, we've got to be honest with you, you know, the side effects are going to be quite severe.
Yeah.
And, you know, that because of the severity of the cancer that Samantha has, you know, it's the only treatment option we have for her. But we do have to, you know, be honest here and let you know, you know, it's a very short matter of time before.
The thing with chemo is there is no guarantees that's going to extend your life.
No.
The only guarantee is that the quality of life you'll have while you're having the treatment, while you're alive, could seriously deteriorate your health. So it's certainly in that instance, it's very debatable about whether you even proceed with the treatment.
This is the tragedy at the time was, you know, as parents, they didn't have any other option.
Yeah.
And because of the specialist at the hospital, you know, my parents couldn't take it out of their hands, the type of treatment that I was going to have. They said, you know, it's something that's got to be done and we need to start treatment straight away. So I was started on chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a nice journey by any means. You know, going from a boisterous, probably tomboy type of person to actually, you know, losing a lot of weight quickly, started to lose a lot of hair quickly. And, you know, I was a skeleton of myself within a short period of time, really.
I mean, we'll get to this, but you are a walking miracle, Samantha.
Do you know what? I don't see that. What I see is I was very blessed, and I was truly blessed at the time to have had the gift of my parents fighting for my survival, and the people involved in my journey to recovery.
So I'm just going to skip along a little bit here, Samantha. So you had the chemo.
Yes.
How long did you have chemo for? I'll ask you a few quick fire questions if that's
Yeah,
okay.
of course you can.
So how long did the treatment last?
Probably about 5 months.
Okay. At the end of that period, did your health then improve?
What happened was, when I was going through the treatment at the time in the hospital, my parents desperately wanted to contact a herbalist. Now, this herbalist my father had seen for a couple of years when me and my brother were young, younger than 8. He'd gone to see this herbalist because my father was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis when we were only very little.
What's that?
What happens is with ankylosing spondylitis is the immune system kind of attacks bone. And when it attacks bone, that's inflammation is caused. Then fusing over a period of time, bones can start to fuse together.
Right.
And people that have that chronic form of disease, mobility is certainly affected, especially, of the spine, the neck area.
So this is how your father met the herbalist?
Yeah, so he met the herbalist before I became ill. And he went to see the herbalist and he started treating him for this condition because he was getting lots of flare-ups and he was in a lot of pain. And he went to see this herbalist called Mr. Abbott.
You could almost say, thanks, Dad, it was quite handy.
Yeah, it was.
Highly inconvenient for your father, but quite handy because this bloke was already in your phone book.
Yes, he was. And it's strange how things happen in life and how you're blessed to meet people. But unfortunately, when I got diagnosed with leukemia, Mr. Abbott had been involved in an accident and he was very poorly himself. So at the time, my parents couldn't even get me started on any herbal treatment when I was first diagnosed. The only option they had was the hospital, which they knew the continuing effect of the treatment and how it was massively affecting my body. My body couldn't take any more of this. Yeah. And what happened was Mr. Abbott became well enough to see me, but he was still bedridden. Now, he'd heard about my plight and Mr. Abbott had agreed to see me. And I never forget this. Mr. Abbott had agreed to see me this particular day and my father brought me to see him and he was carrying me in his arms and he lay me down on the bed next to Mr. Abbott and my dad talked to him about the treatment that I was on and the severity of the blood cancer that I had, and he immediately wanted blood tests taken at his clinic in Leigh, Abbots of Leigh. So a blood test was taken and it was sent over to his clinic for analysis. And the results came back quite quickly, within an hour or two. And my father brought me home. Mr. Abbott wanted to see what the blood results first before he could even say if there could be anything done for me.
Yeah.
So my mum and dad received a phone call and that was Mr. Abbott's wife. And she said that Mr. Abbott thought that he could help. And he wanted me to be started on herbal medicine straight away, which he did. And at the time, I was still going through treatment from the hospital. And Mr. Abbott said, we have to start Samantha on this treatment straight away. Even though she's having, the chemotherapy, we have to try and somehow get to start having the herbal medicine. So, when I was going back to the hospital for treatments and that, I had to stay in hospital for so many days while I was having the treatment. It was like cat and mouse. My father was sneaking me into toilets to have the herbal medicine because obviously it wasn't the done thing, herbal medicine.
I think that probably as well, the reason why I was so keen for you to start the herbal medicine straight away is 2 reasons. One, because obviously you've got leukemia and the cancer of the blood. Yeah. Secondly, to counteract the effects of
Well, that was, yes, absolutely. That's right. It was to stop the terrible effects that, this treatment was doing to my body. So we had to, my parents, were religiously, it was 3 times a day I'd have this particular medicine, which doesn't have any side effects. And the hospital found out about it.
Yeah.
And they weren't happy.
Yeah.
And basically, they were saying, what's this type of treatment that Samantha's having? Because she's on this, the chemotherapy, it could have a severe adverse effect. So they wanted it tested in the lab. So my parents happily gave them, sample of the medicine that I was taking, and it came back quickly that it wouldn't have any effects. The only effect, the terrible effect, was from the chemotherapy.
Yep.
They said, the hospital said, Samantha can keep taking it, but you do realise, the treatment that she's on to try and kill the cancer cells is the chemotherapy, and that's the only one that's going to work. And my parents knew from, obviously, when I first went into the hospital to where I was at with having the treatment, that, the only harm that was happening here was the treatment from the hospital that I was having.
Yeah.
Anyway, a couple of months went on, and my parents were brought in to see the specialist I was under. And he said, for my parents to go in and sit down, he said, look, there's nothing else that we can do for Samantha. She still has 10% blasts of leukemia.
What does that mean, Samantha? What's a 10% blast of leukemia? What's that?
So it's 10%. So basically, I'd still had leukemia cells
Yes.
within my body.
Is 10% high, low? I don't know what it means.
It's still relevant because you've still got cancer cells in the blood. But they were saying that they got it with all the treatment it had. They couldn't kill the cancer cells off.
Right.
So they'd rapidly multiply in the body. So they said, because we couldn't give you any more chemotherapy, and the other option of treatment wasn't suitable for myself, the only option was to take me home where I could die around my family. And they thought I had about 3 weeks to live.
Right.
So I was taken home, and thankfully, at the time, obviously, my parents were, devastated by the news, but they thought to themselves, well, if the Samantha's not having the chemotherapy, that was causing so much damage to the body.
Yep.
The herbal medicine can have time to start treating me. So when my parents got the news, and my father contacted the herbalist straight away. And he
this
said,
guy's name again, what's it?
Sorry, Charles Abbott.
That's it.
Charles Abbott, a herbalist. He was a fantastic man. I was probably going off the path a little bit by explaining a little bit about Mr. Abbott. Mr. Abbott worked down the mines and he got TB. Thankfully, he's seen a herbalist who saved him from TB with herbal medicine. And by saving his life, he wanted to help other people.
Yeah.
And he trained under the herbalist that actually saved his life. And from there, he went on for many years, till the age of 93, in treating patients. He had about 10,000 people or more on his books at his clinic. And people travelled from all over the world to see this amazing herbalist. He'd saved many a life over his lifetime. And I was one of them that he did, thankfully, save. And I was his last patient as well. So going back to the terrible diagnosis and being brought home.
So at this point, you've just been brought home and
Yeah.
you've been told about 3 weeks to live.
Yes.
And you're still 8 years old at this point.
I was nine by then. And my parents contacted the clinic, and Mr. Abbott said, we have the time now for the treatment to work without the terrible effects of the chemotherapy. will start from now, where the herbal medicine can start taking a full effect on the body. He wanted my parents not to worry, but certain things would have to change, in particular my diet. So no red meat, no dairy products, things like that. So I had lots of fresh fruit, pulses, vegetables, chicken, and certain fish. So that was one thing that totally had to change. And the herbal medicine. Now the 3 weeks came and went, and 5 weeks came along, and I was still alive. 7 weeks came, and I was still alive. I mean, my parents would, they were strict about, obviously, the making sure that I was having the medication at the right time. So I'd have medicines, I'd have lotion like put on my abdomen, my neck, certain areas where I'd have to have that put on, and the diet as well. Now, combining all of them together, from that end journey where I should have supposedly passed away, I was still there.
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Of course you can.
Samantha.
Of course you can.
This is just as we're going through it now, these are thoughts that are being triggered. Number one is, what's your diet like now? Do you still look after yourself and adhere to that advice?
I do. I do in respect of herbal medicine. I've used it on and off for a number of years, not for the leukemia, because I was cured of that when I was 14. But I have used it for other minor things.
But I mean, for example, red meat. You don't eat red meat?
No.
No. So some of this advice, I suppose once you've had this health scare and you get a second chance,
yes,
you're going to want to look after yourself.
Yeah, of course.
You're going to have to be a bit more diligent and strict with your diet than other people because of what your body's been through.
Yes, I mean, I do. I mean, there has been times where, I've had the cake or something like that, but it's all in moderation. Yeah. You are what you eat. So, if you start putting things into the body, too much fats, too much salts, too much sugars, over a period of time, that has an impact on the body. So by looking after your body, having a good diet, it does, help you physically, and also it's not just about the diet, it's also about other factors. So regular exercise and meditation and things like that.
It's the mind as well.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, if you consistently eat crap, lots of sugar or fats, certain bad fats, things like this, you're going to have, especially with sugar, you're going to have these blood sugar spikes, these energy levels up and down, and then that affects your mood, and then you don't feel good. And
quite lethargic.
Yeah, all of these things. So
definitely.
By looking after your diet, which looks after your body, it also looks after your mind.
Yeah, of course it does. It's mind and body. It's about them both.
So I'll bring you back to your journey. You've gone home, you're 7 weeks in, you're still alive at this point. Then talk us through from there till where you get the all clear at 14.
Yeah,
where you're
of course.
cured. So this next 4 or 5 years.
Well,
that was a well.
I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to sound so singular. Like taking a deep breath when I'm speaking. From, like you say, the 7 or 8 weeks in, there was a number of things that happened. Mr. Abbott was obviously treating me. I was still alive. And I had actually a spiritual journey, would you believe?
Okay.
I'll go back on to that. I went to Lourdes. The local community had done lots of fundraising for me when they've heard of my plight when I was in hospital. Yeah. And I was taken to Lourdes.
Were you walking about at this point? Or are you being carried? Or are you in a wheelchair?
No. What happened was I went to Lourdes and I was quite weak. And so some of the hills, because it was quite hilly in Lourdes, if it was hilly going up, I could get carried up.
Yeah.
If it was too on my dad's back or something like that.
You're going to be quite weak, though.
But I was
Yeah.
very, very weak.
Yeah.
Yes. And we did the taught light procession, and we seen the grotto with Bernadette. So it was a fascinating journey, and it's something I'll never forget. And I don't think my parents will ever forget that journey. And when I come back and I went back to the hospital within a few weeks, that's when the diagnosis was the final diagnosis. You know, Samantha hasn't got long left. And I was brought home. And it was about the 8 weeks in. You know, I was still alive and I was at home. And I was, you know, still poorly, you know, because, you know, I was still, health-wise, and, you know, I was by no means out of the woods. I was gravely ill at the time. And I never forget, I was unsettled one night. I wasn't well at all that particular night. I wasn't feeling well. I went to sleep and then I woke up, and I never forget, there was a warmth, a light at the end of my room. And I was like looking as a child, and I was like looking, and this light got brighter. And then all of a sudden, this figure appeared of a monk in a brown robe with a beard. And it was the eyes. It had the most bluest eyes that I've probably ever seen in someone.
Sounds like St. Francis of Assisi, this.
It was fascinating. Honestly, it was fascinating. And while I was in Lourdes, I was given a locket with a piece of robe from Padre Pio. And so I had this locket, and the warmth that I had, there was a warmth. The room was warm, and it was I can't explain it. It was just a beautiful moment. And the person was, this lovely gentleman was there for a couple of minutes, and he come closest to the bed, and he was leaning over and he was looking at me, and the warmth I felt in my body it was a gentle warmth. And then this lovely monk walked away, walked to the light, and disappeared. And the following morning, I slept so well that night. And the following morning, I woke up and all I could hear was the birds singing. And all I did was I went up to my locket, and I don't know why, but I opened the locket and the piece of robe wasn't there. It'd gone. And I was, I don't know, it felt as though this person had come to me for some unknown reason, and I didn't need that piece of the robe. And I kind of somehow, I don't know why, but I somehow accepted that.
It's almost like it came to say, right, you don't need that anymore.
Yes.
You're cured.
Yeah, it was strange. And I never forget, and I told my mum and dad, and they didn't poo-poo it in any way. They just said, well, you know, what a lovely experience that you've had. And I'm sure that's something you'll never forget. And I never have. And from there, I continued to get stronger. I was on the herbal medicine. And this lady had come to see us, a health visitor. And she wanted to know how I was doing. And I was in the living room at the time, and my mum was in the kitchen. She came in and she said hello to me because I was lay on the couch. She went in to see my mum, and I never forget it. And she said to my mum, "You do realise Samantha is dying, you know, and you have to prepare yourself for that." But it was quite the way she was speaking to my mum was quite abrupt, really.
Yeah.
And I could hear that. And, you know, and my mum obviously realised I could hear that. And so she brought her to the other side of the kitchen. She started talking to her. And then the health visitor came in and she asked about how I was. and what was I eating, and asking questions like that.
To be honest, if they think you're dying anyway, you can eat what you bloody like.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
True, yes.
Yeah.
So it's sad, really. It was really sad. Instead of coming round and just supporting my parents, it wasn't about that. It was like, come on, stop fooling yourself.
Yeah.
Samantha's going to die. Instead of thinking, well, do you know what? As long as she's still here, that's the main thing.
Yeah.
And giving my parents support.
It's almost like they sort of, okay, let's just get on with this now.
Yeah.
And I tell a story, it's from Deepak Chopra, and I've read a lot of his books over the past, not recently, but it's a while ago. And it's the story it tells about diagnosis, not prognosis. And there's a guy, he has football injuries, and he has an X-ray.
Yeah.
Fast forward 20 years later, and this guy isn't well, and he's not feeling great. Goes and gets an X-ray, and they say you've got tumours in your lungs. You've got 4 weeks to live.
Yeah.
Sure enough, he dies 4 weeks later. They then compile and assimilate all these medical records, put everything together, and they find the X-ray that was taken 20 years previous when he was in high school, when he broke his collarbone and they X-rayed him. The tumours were there. They'd always been there. But until he was told and bought into that prognosis that he was going to die, he coexisted with those tumours without a problem. And that story tells you a lot about when you're diagnosed with something and somebody says, you've got this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Not so. You've got this. There's still infinite possibilities.
Absolutely.
There's many people like yourself who have cancer, for example. That's one example where they recover.
Yeah.
Some recover, some don't.
Yeah.
At that point, when you've got a diagnosis, it's very possible that you can recover.
Yeah,
It's
of course it is.
also possible that you're going to pass away or, become very ill and die. It's really important. What you believe at that point is critical. I know from my experience that what you believe will manifest and become your reality.
Yeah.
So I think this point in case is they came along and thought, well, hang on, we've been back 4 times now. She's still here. Can you hurry up, please? That's how it feels.
In life, it doesn't mean that one option of treatment is right for everyone. People's choices in life, it doesn't mean if one person does that another person should follow and do that. And it's about having choices and valuing them choices, but being supported in them choices. When my parents made that choice about me going to see the herbalist, as time went on, the hospital, instead of supporting my parents, 3 months on, I'm still alive, but by this time I'm getting stronger. And my hair is growing, coming through nicely. And I wasn't bedridden all the time by now. And you would have thought, or my parents thought at the time, that, the doctors at the hospital would have been fascinated. What a wonderful story. Samantha is still here after going through everything she's gone through. But they didn't support my parents with the herbal medicine. And they basically were saying that, it is just a matter of time, I think, before Samantha does pass away.
They'll go down one or two routes. They'll either say, oh, yeah, it's because of the chemo. Or they'll say that they'll get annoyed because they'd written you off. And then you've gone down another route.
Absolutely.
One that they didn't recommend and condone, and they won't like it.
Well, that's the problem, and that is the tragedy. But my father was on the Parents Teachers Association at school, and they'd always abided by the law, never questioned anything about orthodox medicine or anything. And it was only when they had to go through what they did with me and having orthodox medicine, in particular the hospital, the way they kind of turned against my parents. And they wanted me quite quickly to return back to school. I mean, don't forget, my immune system was shattered.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to pick up infection after infection at this point. But no, they were adamant. And they wanted blood tests to see if there's any damage being done by the herbal medicine. The only damage that was done was the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
That was the only damage that was done.
Yeah.
And this was the beginning of the battle, the fight my parents had with the hospital that I was under at the time. They made it clear that if my parents didn't send me to school, I would maybe made a ward of court.
It's terrible because now they'd struggle to make this happen now because anybody can homeschool the child.
I know.
But back then,
Yes.
you couldn't.
No, you definitely couldn't. You know, it was, or if people did, it was very rare. But, you know, they suffered a difficult time through the education authorities, and they'd be threatened with court. And that's the beginning of their journey. With ours, they just started. They were just, their daughter was only very slowly at the time. You know, I'd gone from the brink of death to now the herbal medicine had chance to work, and the hospital, no, we want her back in school.
Yeah, they don't like it. Basically, you're getting better, not by the route that they've prescribed, the way the treatment they've been given, and it's highly inconvenient. They can't really explain it. It certainly might highlight the fact that radiotherapy wasn't the answer and that herbal medicine was.
Yes.
And they don't want to hear that. And so they're starting to make your life very difficult for your parents. It stinks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Stinks.
I mean, it sounds awful, and I know it's a strong word to use, but it's the truth. My parents were terrorised with social services and the medical profession. Because I was alive, because I was having a herbal medicine, I mean, I was getting stronger and stronger. But they were saying, basically, because I was surviving, they wanted to take the authority off my parents. Because what? Because herbal medicine was working. What crime is there in that? What crime is it for any parent to want to do the best for their child and to try an alternative treatment? That's clearly working.
Yeah, and they didn't suddenly stop your radiotherapy. They did it in conjunction with it.
At the time, yes. Yeah.
So what's the problem? It's crazy.
Yeah.
I've wrote in the book about pharmaceutical companies
Yeah.
and some of the things that have gone on in the past. And
Yeah.
we won't go into it all here, but one important thing to remember is they are a business.
Yeah.
And the medical institutions, NHS, doctors, everybody, they're all hand in glove with these pharmaceutical
Absolutely.
companies.
Yeah.
I say I won't go into it now,
Yes.
but they're a business and they're about money. And radiotherapy is one of a number of treatments that is highly profitable
Yes.
for these companies.
Yes. And, when I was diagnosed and when I had the treatment and the herbal medicine started to work, because my parents believed so much in orthodox medicine at the time, they were shocked. They were shocked what they were putting my parents through, and more importantly, putting me at risk. And they even said at one point, we'll need to do assessments on Samantha to see whether she has any learning difficulties because of the adverse effects from the treatment, meaning chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I didn't because of the herbal medicine that I was on. But quite early on, so within, 5 months, my parents had no choice but to send me back to school because the medical profession was saying, if you don't send her back to school, we're going to take her into care, basically, and make a ward of court. So, and that's when the herbal medicine would stop. So my parents had to send me back into school, and what happened? Infection was picked up quickly. Had to come out of school, was back at home. I was on the herbal medicine and the infection settled down. But the medical profession, the authorities were, they were furious that, they were taking me out of school. Again, they were saying, listen, get Samantha back in school. So a few months down the line, my parents are trying to fight with them, saying, look, because of immune system still, we can't take that risk.
It's a terrible situation. Put you back in school, they're risking your life because your immune system's depleted and you're going to get infections and pick things up.
Yeah.
Take you out of school and potentially they'll take you off them.
That's it. So this, and this was it. And, my parents, the stories, honestly, that happened. One time my dad was in work and, I was at a state, I was about 8 months in. By that time, from terminal diagnosis at the very end of life, near as damn it, to 8 months in. So my parents had to take me out of school because I got this infection. So social services turned up at my dad's works. He was doing nights at 1 o'clock in the morning. 1 o'clock in the morning. Brought my dad outside the gates of where my dad works. The security contacted his department and said people are here to see him, so he had to leave. And basically, they were concerned that where's Samantha now? We're very concerned about the diet she's on and the medication. But you don't do things like that 1 o'clock in the morning. Whether that was to frighten Dad, I don't really know. It was kind of, I didn't know about that at the time. It was only later, when I was in my teens, that this story was told to me. And it's kind of, my father at the time thought, well, what do we do? We're going to have to try and put Samantha back in school. So I went back in school again, picked up an infection quite quickly because there's so many children in the class. It's fine if you haven't got a low immunity. Of course, it's fine. And I'm passionate about education. But when someone's not got extremely poor immune system, you're high risk going to get the infection. So again, within days, I got an infection and I was took out of school, treated again. And Mr. Abbott said, look, if you keep putting Samantha back in school, and she keeps getting an infection, we can't risk putting Samantha's body through more knockbacks with her immune system because we have to be careful of the leukemia. We have to get that under control. Because otherwise, we're going to take backward steps and we can't risk that. So my dad and mum thought this time, no, we're not doing it. We have to do something. And moving the story on slightly, my father was thinking, what can we do? And my mum and dad decided the only way to protect her immune system is by having a home education.
Yeah, like a tutor.
Yes.
Yeah. So they can't dispute the fact that you're being educated formally.
Yeah, well, that's where the story begins with the education. My parents had to fight for a home tutor. They still were adamant that they thought that the only way for me to have a quality of life is to be back around friends and live a normal life as possible. That's great, like I've just mentioned, if you've got a brilliant immune system, but when you haven't, that's not that couldn't really happen at this stage. So they asked for a home tutor. Home tutor was provided for 4 days. 4 days.
Yeah.
And then they did an assessment and thought that it was best that I returned to school. So my parents were, the lady that came, she was lovely. There was no issues there. She provided the space to do structured lessons for me. But no, they 4 days, and that was what they gave the home tutor for. And my parents were basically back at square one. And Mr. Abbott said, it's got to be home tutored. It's the only way forward. And my dad was frantic with worry, and my mum was. And they met a lovely lady that, through chance, with knowing another friend, really, called Andrea. And she lived in Bury. And she was homeschooling a couple of sons that she had. She'd done that for a couple of years.
See, what I don't understand is why they've left her alone to homeschool her
Yeah.
kids, but yet they wouldn't leave
No.
your family alone.
Yes.
Doesn't make any sense, does it?
Crazy. Well, she'd actually, this lovely lady, Andrea, she'd set up Education Otherwise, a group. So for parents that wanted to look at home tutoring the children for many different reasons. And, she did come up against a brick wall because in the 70s it wasn't the done thing.
Yeah.
So she really had to fight for that, for this support group. And thankfully, my dad met Andrea, and my dad told her the plight and what was going on with me. And she said, listen, this is a support group. If there's any support you need, I'm here for you. And she was instrumental in starting off the journey of homeschooling.
Yeah. I suppose she'd paved the way to speak to your parents and say, look, I've done it. This is how you go about it.
Exactly. It was like the ammunition my parents needed because, they were being put back to that wall. You've gone against the system, and that's a scary thing to say. But we hadn't. My parents were trying to save my life. That's all they were doing. They had to make these choices because they had no other choices. And I was becoming stronger. I was looking a lot better, and there was no suffering. Herbal medicine, there was no suffering. Like I'd gone through with the chemotherapy and the horrendous nausea and how it just destroys your body.
Yeah.
So my parents meeting Andrea, she was a lifeline. She was.
Do you know what I'm staggered about when I hear your story? I'm not staggered that you survived leukemia, although because that can happen.
Yeah.
I'm staggered that you survived the radiotherapy that was for adults.
Yeah.
Because that basically cooks your body from the inside out. It's terrible.
I mean, it was, even to this day, you can never forget. You can never forget. I mean, it was horrific. There's no other word for it. It was horrific.
There is one thing. This is a miraculous healing miracle machine. Put the right things in it, surrounded with the right things, and it can heal almost anything.
Exactly.
Especially when it's a young machine as well. You
Yeah.
know, and it just shows you, and I'm not talking about the leukemia, I'm talking about the radiotherapy. It just shows you that this machine, this body, this gift we've got it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's so incredible, how it can heal. And it can. I'd met some amazing souls in that cancer ward when I was in there, because you're talking 6 months, say, long period of time. And I never forget it. There was a lovely girl called Donna, and she had myeloid leukemia. So we were both, going through this horrific journey. She was unique, and I was blessed to have met her. And there was another lady called Jan, and her parents didn't visit her at the hospital very often. When she did manage to go home for weekends from in between the treatments, she used to have to look after her family, her sisters and brothers a lot. So my parents kind of took her under, made a big fuss of her. Jan used to, when we were in that ward, even though she was battling, she would always come over and stroke your head, and she was amazing. She was so beautiful, such a beautiful soul, and she died. And it's stories like that you'd never forget, because when you're at the worst in your life and you meet the most beautifulest of people in your life, that give you that strength. To give me the will, I'd say the will, to keep fighting. It's not just the journey. What the story wasn't just about me. It was about them beautiful children in that cancer ward with me, and how they, even though they're going through their own battles with everything they were going, they helped each other. They helped me. I was there for them. Jan was like a little miniature mum. And sadly she died. Donna, the other young girl that I was literally next bed to. I never forget it. This was about a year into of the, having the herbal medicine just on its own. My hair was all back and I looked really well. I'd gone for a blood test because when you have cancer, so it'll go from once a month for so many months, and to 3 months, you'll go for blood tests back. Then it'll go to 6 months, and then once a year for 5 years. So I was back anyway at the hospital, and I used to be terribly frightened of going back into that hospital because of what I went through. I felt nauseated just thinking about it. I used to dread like going for my appointments because I was just petrified. I come out of to see the doctor, and he checked my lymph nodes and things like that just to see whether there was any swellings in my lymph nodes. And he said, we're just waiting for the blood tests. So we went back into this other room, and at the side, there's the side wards when people are really poorly go into. I turned round and I looked, and I had to go close because it was like all glass round. And I looked in, and it was my beautiful friend Donna, and I knew she was really, really, really ill, and I'll never forget her eyes just looking. Some things you just don't forget.
Yeah.
A couple of days later, she passed away.
Yeah. Well, it's not how long you're here for.
No.
The number of lives you can touch can be tenfold for a child, so and part of her journey was probably to connect with you, to guide you.
Yeah, it's just things like that make you determined. Just keep going, never give up, keep going. And I think that's always been my philosophy in life. No matter what happens in your life, you've got these beautiful souls that were only on this earth for a very, very, very short time, but they touch the hearts of so many people, and I was blessed to be one of them.
Yeah, that message, keep moving forward. Keep moving forward, never give up, keep going, keep going, always.
Yeah, definitely.
you.